Montaigne's great announced topic is his own mind, and by extension, that leads naturally to the human mind in general. He uses himself as a very obvious example from which we can draw our own conclusions about the human mind, but he's putting his out there in a way that is both demonstrative and intuitive. And one of the early essays that he offers up in his collection is called On the Power of the Imagination, or Of the Power of the Imagination, or Of Imagination, depending on who's translating and the editor, and yada, yada, yada. But here he takes on the power of the mind itself and its relation to questions of mind over matter, let's say, the presence of, or the importance of the mind and reason in contrast to physical realities. So you get that mind-body dualism question in there that the Renaissance loved, and it presents an opportunity for him to again tackle explicitly a somewhat complex and esoteric and abstract topic, while demonstrating implicitly how he thinks about something, and he does it in a way that is flat out hysterical. A strong imagination creates the event, say the scholars. I am one of those who are very much influenced by the imagination. He is here admitting that, okay, the imagination, the mind, reason, the ability to think, these are all powerful influences on my life. And he's saying that right up front. And it's somewhat, clear there. He begins with a note of great declarative clarity. And the path he's going to take through this discussion will at times become less clear. And this is part of the fun. He starts talking about the power of essentially empathy as a psychological reality. You become aware of someone's suffering, and you may not have physical symptoms, but you empathize with them to a degree that you start to manifest them. Hypochondria, essentially. But here, significantly saying that the psychological precedes the physical. They are inextricably linked, but there is almost a priority, a precedence for the mental over the physical, which is an interesting little calculation that he's starting with there. The sight of other people's anguish causes very real anguish in me, and my feelings have often usurped the feelings of others. He empathizes. He is connected to other people, which in itself is a remarkable little statement that he's making, that, he feels so connected to other people that it is sometimes a great problem for him. But he starts to take on a little bit of an ironic tone when he says, I visit less willingly the sick, or a continual cougher irritates my lungs and throats. I visit less willingly the sick toward whom duty directs me than those toward whom I am less attentive and concerned. I catch the disease that I study, and I lodge it in me. First of all, important to know, again, this is a time of continual plague ravishing through Europe. So the idea of, the catching a disease, that's not something you say lightly. That's not just tossing that out there. So there's a little resonance there. Lodge it in me. I do not find it strange that imagination brings fevers and death to those who give it a free hand and encourage it. Now there it's starting to sound a little ironic. I do not find it strange, which generally means he probably does, that imagination brings fevers and death to those who give it free rein and encourage it. to give your imagination free rein is somehow now life-threatening, which is an odd thing. Remember, his whole project in this is to record his thoughts, to just think and jot down the path of his mind, almost like he's taking dictation of his thoughts. And so he's saying, well, no, I disapprove of giving my imagination, or anyone giving imagination, free rein. No, it should all be plotted out beforehand. I'm not sure about what he's doing here. And he starts referencing very classical anecdotes. Gallus Vibius. I don't really know who that is. I don't really care. But he starts to take it in a, because of that somewhat, august reference. He takes the august and brings it to a somewhat surprising place. He says, let me see, what's it? One man who was being unbound to have his pardon read him drops, well, all right, have his pardon read him, dropped stone dead on the scaffold, struck down by his mere imagination. Somebody who was about to be executed died before they could actually kill him because he was so paralyzed with fear. The power of his imagination of imagining death brought on real death. Whether it's true, I don't know. We drip with sweat, we tremble, we turn pale and turn red at the blows of our imagination. It's getting very visceral here all of a sudden. Reclining in our feather beds, we feel our bodies agitated by their impact, sometimes to the point of expiring. And boiling youth, fast asleep, grows so hot in the harness that it dreams it satisfies its amorous desires. So we're starting with a classical Roman reference of a classical Roman orator, and suddenly we're talking about wet dreams. You gotta love them. The 180-degree spins he takes here are just remarkable. And he taps it off with a quote from Lucretius, whom I do know, so that as though it were an actual affair, they pour out mighty streams and stain the clothes they wear. It's kind of gross. But he passes through that. He lets the laugh subside a little, and then he talks about how he talks a little bit about tales of horns growing on heads, which of course is a euphemism for cuckold. A man who has had his wife cheat on him is said to be wearing horns, the cuckold's horns. And they're saying that, one night this guy dreamt that he had horns on the head, and the next morning he woke up that he found that he had actual horns there. But it starts going down this line, and he starts talking about, suddenly now he goes from the classical anecdote, he brings out a personal anecdote. And he talks about how he ran across, I might have seen a man while out walking one day. I might have seen a man whom the Bishop of Soissons had named Germain at confirmation, but whom all the inhabitants of that place had seen and known as a girl named Marie until the age of 22. And he tells this little wives' tale, this essentially, a rumor of this man who lives in a village who was spontaneously changed from a man to a woman, I believe in the act of exercise, and for straining himself in some ways and jumping, he says, his masculine organs came forth. Oh, And then, of course, he goes into some more classical references to say, well, this Pliny said this happened, and Cretius said this happened, and or these other anecdotes culled through Montaigne's extensive classical learning are starting to come back, and we're saying, well, yes, there was this example and that example, and honestly, gender is something that is very complicated in the classical era. So there are lots of stories about that. So he can bring all these up, but he says, for if the imagination has power in such things, it is so continually and vigorously fixed on this subject that in order not to have it relapse so often into the same thought and sharpness of desire, it is better off if once and for all it incorporates this masculine member in girls. The psychological precedes the physical, even when it is a ridiculous physicality, even when it is fantastic, even when it is pure imagination. You think something and it comes true, theoretically. They drop some more references. We have, what is it? The scars of King Dagobert and St. Francis. Celsus tells of a priest. St. Augustine names another. And then he hits a nice note here, talking about all of these supposed miraculous changes. He just keys in on that miracle bit there. And he says, it is probable that the principal credit of miracles, visions, enchantments, and such extraordinary occurrences comes from the power of imagination, acting principally upon the minds of the common people, which are softer. Their belief has been strongly seized that they think they see what they do not see. That is heresy. Miracles, very powerfully believed in this era. This is also the era in the wake of the Protestant Reformation, in the wake of the Inquisition that followed the Protestant Reformation. Religious wars are starting to ravage the countryside over the right kind of Christianity, dogma, beliefs. These things have very real consequences. And here he is saying, well, it's all just what people are imagining, and it's all kind of silly. Because he is saying this, however, in a way that is sort of bouncing around in a semi-serious tone, and some parts of it are flat out ridiculous, he can get away with burying that little nugget in there, which is gutsy and very clever. He is, after all, by training, a politician, and he knows how to say just enough to hint at where he's going without actually committing himself to saying something that can get him in trouble. From there, it gets even funnier. I am still of the opinion that those comical inhibitions by which our society is so fettered that people talk of nothing else are for the most part the effects of apprehension and fear, for I know by experience. Which gives you a sense of the empirical. He is, very interested in seeing how things really are and looking around and examining things. His own mind for one, the world around him for another, and making judge based on the evidence he sees. But now he says, I know from experience that one man whom I can answer for as myself. First of all, you only experience your own experience in his calculation here. That one man is going to be him. One that he can answer for himself. Again, he's probably talking about himself. He's just positing that at the beginning so that he can, get a little objective distance for it. And again, plausible deniability. He's very good at that. Answer for myself, on whom there can be no suspicion or whatever of whom I can answer for myself, on whom there can fall no suspicion whatever of impotence, and just as little of being enchanted, having heard a friend of his tell the story of an extraordinary impotence into which he had fallen at the moment when he needed it last. And here he's sort of playing on the word impotence, which is similar in the French, where it has a sense of, the ability to speak for someone, the ability to be empowered to represent someone, but also impotence. And that's where he's going with this. That's what he's saying. And he starts talking about, and he goes into this long passage about how the mind can play tricks on you, how the mind can be a little unkind in those moments when you really want your physical self to be prominent. Your mind starts going and getting in the way. This mishap is to be feared only in enterprises where our soul is immoderately tense with desire and respect, and especially if the opportunity is unexpected and pressing. I remind everyone that Montaigne is in the downward slope of his life at the time that he is writing this. He is a mature man who's had some experience of the world, and he's now writing this reflectively. So, he lived to be a good old age, but he's probably in his 50s when he's writing this. And I know one man who found it helpful to bring it to a body that had already begun to be sated elsewhere, so as to lull his frenzied ardor, and who with age finds himself less impotent through being less potent. And I know another. And here he's bringing in like every little story he's ever heard from his other old man friends, possibly, who was helped when a friend assured him that he was supplied with a counter battery of enchantments that were certain to save him. I had better tell you how this happened. And then he starts talking about all of these superstitions and these folk cures and these silly tricks or silly potions that you could take. That would, it was Renaissance era Viagra, supposedly. And this is all because of the tricks that the mind plays, and the way that the mind itself gets carried away and gets in the way of the physical. Again, the mental presupposes the physical. The physical is just sort of trailing around. Thoughts outweigh physical matter. Now, women are wrong who greet us with those threatening, quarrelsome, and coy countenances which would put out our fires even as they light them. The daughter-in-law of Pythagoras used to say that the woman who goes to bed with a man should put off her modesty and with her skirt and put it on again with her petticoat. The soul of the assailant, when troubled with many various alarms, is easily discouraged, and when imagination has once made a man suffer this shame, and it does so only at first encounters, inasmuch as these are more boiling and violent, and also because in this first intimacy a man is much more afraid of failing, having begun badly, he gets from this accident a feverishness and vexation which lasts into subsequent occasions. Married people, whose time is all their own, should neither press their undertaking, nor even attempt it if they are not ready. It is better to fail unbecomingly to hansel the nuptial couch, which is full of agitation and feverishness, and wait for some more private and less tense opportunity, than to fall into perpetual misery from having been stunned and made desperate by a first refusal. So he's saying that, maybe after your wedding, when it's been a long day, you're tired, and maybe you had a couple of drinks and you're just not quite there. Let that pass. Everybody just gets a good night's sleep, rest, and we'll come back to it another time. So he's giving very practical advice. He's jumping into this fairly, awkward situation and saying, well, okay, let's not try and force things. Let's find practical advice. Go to sleep. Get a good night's rest. You wake up tomorrow, you have a good breakfast, you have a relaxing day, and tomorrow night, things might happen differently. So he's he starts jumping on this question of impotence and making it a real riot. People are right to notice the unruly liberty of this member obtruding so importunately when we have no use for it. There are moments when it's awkward. You're out in public and what's happening? It's awkward. No use for it, and failing so importunately when we have the most use for it. Timing is everything. And struggling for mastery so imperiously with our will, refusing with so much pride and obstinacy in our solicitations, both mental and manual. So he's going on this, and from there he takes, now that's funny enough, just in the phrasing of it, the formality of it, but he takes it a step further at that point. He's always turning things around and looking at it from different angles, and here he just amps it up another notch by making it a court case. Rhetorically, he is going to plead the case for the errant member, as he calls it. People, if, however, in the matter of his rebellion being blamed and used as proof to condemn him, he has paid me to plead his cause. Montaigne did train as a lawyer when he was young, didn't much like it, so he never really did it, but he has that rhetorical sense ingrained in him, and he uses it with mastery, even in what is essentially a farce here. I should perhaps place our other members, his fellows, under suspicion of having framed this trumped-up charge out of sheer envy of the importance and pleasure of use of him, and having armed everyone against him by a conspiracy, malignantly charging him alone with their common fault. Your liver does what it has to do, but it doesn't get a lot of pressure. Nobody thinks about it. Same thing with your stomach usually. All your other members, all your other bodily organs, where's the pressure on them? How many times do the forced movements of our face bear witness to the thoughts that we were holding secret and betray us to those present? It's a good question, and the thoughts, the appearance of things, the ability to function, but also suddenly we're talking about the interior being, the interior thoughts. We're dwelling on those unseen and that which needs to be interpreted, that which needs to be read, to be understood. To vindicate the omnipotence of our will, St. Augustine alleges that he knew a man who commanded his behind to produce as many farts as he wanted. And his commentator Vives goes him one better with another example of his own time of farts arranged to suit the tone of verses. So now we're out of penises and we're into farts. And he's talking about not only farts, but somebody who can fart a tune. Farting as a musical instrument. So highbrow. Humor is here, it's an empirical tool. He is making you think about things that are funny, and they're charming, but they're also very real, because throughout all of this, we're talking about the power of the mind and the power of the mind over matter. And he's just doing it in a funny way, in a way that honestly stand-up comics like to do. And again, he gets personal with it. Besides, I know one so turbulent and unruly, himself, that for 40 years it has kept his master farting with a constant and unremitting wind and compulsion, and is thus taking him to his death. And you really get the sense that he's talking about himself there and admitting that, sometimes you just gotta, he's spending a lot of time alone in the tower, but when he comes down to the family room afterwards, it can get awkward. And he ends, in a kind of mock formality. He's pleading his case in a very lawyerly way. To conclude, I would say in defense of the honorable member whom I represent, may it please the court to take into consideration that in this matter, although my client's case is inseparably, indistinguishably linked with that of an accessory, nevertheless, he alone has been brought to trial. All the other body parts have their little rebellions here and there, and they're not accused of anything. They're not really hated so much. They talk about, he takes it into other areas. He talks about placebos and the way that those work to try and trick people into thinking that something is going to heal them. But all this may be attributed to the narrow seam between the soul and body through which the experience of the one is communicated to the other. The narrow seam between the soul and the body. The human reason is itself subject to animal rules of sorts, but the animal is in a way subservient to the human reason. And again, experience is emphasized there. That's always a note that he's going to say. We need to watch these things, and we're all just trying to learn from experience. Talking about, let's see, more. The ancients maintain that certain women of Scythia, when animated and enraged against anyone, would kill him with a mere glance. Now we're talking about like an aggressive use of the mind. Mental towers. Tortoises and ostriches hatch their eggs just by looking at them. I'm not quite sure about that one either, but again, you can't really take these things too literally all the time. The story of he has particular scorn for charlatans. To me, magicians are poor authorities. Nevertheless, we know by experience, ironic right there, that women transmit marks of their fancies to the bodies of the children they carry in their wombs. Witness the one who gave birth to the Moor. And there was presented to Charles, King of Bohemia and Emperor, a girl from near Pisa, all hairy and bristly, who her mother said had been thus conceived because of a picture of St. John the Baptist hanging by her bed. Now, those are two very quick little allusions to stories where married women, have babies who don't look so much like their dad. Or at least they don't look so much like the men that the mom is married to. But it's all just a mental thing, They saw, the mom saw a picture of someone who was a little different, and that's, of course, what the baby came out looking like. Yeah, okay. If you buy that one, more power to you. This is all just all of these little anecdotes, all of these little diversions are the power of imagination, and they're a demonstration of how the mind itself works. So he's taking us all on this wild ride of thought that is sometimes hysterical and sometimes just confusing to keep up with, and you're never quite sure when he's being serious, even when he's really not being serious at all. But he's demonstrating what thought is. He's demonstrating exactly what the mind goes through in these little illusions, because he's tossing in these classical references, these stories he has heard from his neighbors. I saw, or I met a guy who told me this story, and that is put on the same level as something that Cicero might have written. And so all of these thoughts are jumbling around in his head, and he's just giving them expression and demonstrating exactly how the mind works. And it's not particularly logical all the time, and it's not particularly productive all the time, and it's certainly not serious all the time, but it is vibrant. It is fascinating, and it is fun to watch. And if you just think about things for a little while, it can entertain you in ways that no other source ever could. There is a practical value to the imagination, and he is all about finding a practical value, because this is a Renaissance thing also. It's like, well, he's examining all of these thoughts and thinking about them. He's saying, well, maybe they're serious, maybe they're not. They're just sort of fun. The fun has a practical value in itself. He Plutarch might well say to us, concerning his accomplishments, that the credit belongs to others if his examples are wholly and everywhere true, but that their being useful to posterity and presented with a luster which lights our way to virtue, that is his work. He's citing Plutarch there, but it's his project as well. Just providing something of value. A luster which lights our way to virtue. That is his work too. There is no danger, as there is in a medicinal drug, in an old story being this way or that. An old story, people think a lot of silly things. And the important thing is to test what they think against your own reason. Match it against your own experience. Perhaps in the realm of religion, as he hints at there, somewhat shockingly. But use your mind as you experience the world. It can be fun that way. It's effective that way. It can keep you from getting lost in a lot of silliness along the way. And ultimately, your thoughts can light your way to virtue.